right, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Future Ear Radio podcast. I am really excited to be joined today by Dr. Robert Allen and Brent Jones from Topple Diagnostics. So, how you guys doing today? Thanks for coming on.
We're good. Thanks for having us. We
Yeah,
appreciate it.
doing great. Doing great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, wanted to have you on. Wanted to talk about Topple, a very cool kind of newish company that's been around. I'm not sure we'll get into how long it's been around, but has been, kind of flown onto my radar as a really unique, interesting startup that's doing some cool things in this space around vestibular diagnostics and sort of that whole subspecialty. So, without further ado, I'll kick it over to you guys and let you share how the company kind of came to be, how you two met, and we'll just take it from there.
Golly, Topple started
Was it
October would have been I guess it was 8 years, right? Now, is it officially 8 years? No, 7 years. Sorry, officially 7 years, right? 2017. The company started off not really anything like what it is today. So my background, I've been in the medical sales world, et cetera, for a long time, worked for some Fortune 100 companies, et cetera, did that for a while. Realized really quickly that I wasn't very good at being managed by people. So I decided to manage myself, if you will. But I was looking into fall risk. My grandmother actually had slipped, fell, broke her hip, and I watched her fade away, if you will, over 3 years, right? I mean, it didn't happen suddenly, but it was, inpatient rehab, outpatient rehab, all things that she just never really came back from, never really was herself. Go from assisted living to home health to hospice, all through the entire track mark. So my call points for a long time had been internal medicine, primary care. So I began to look at fall risk. So I was curious why, elderly patients fall, and why, much like a lot of our things in healthcare, we're not doing anything to prevent it. How are we researching it? So I called on my internal medicine counterpoints, primary cares, and try to pick up interest, see what, if we could create some sort of version of it. I bought this piece of crap equipment that I think will rename anonymous for this call. Rob actually brought it out.
I did.
Piece of crap equipment that, ironically, Rob and I gifted to each other every Christmas. We wrap it.
We're finding different ways to give it to each other, but I think the plan is to shadow box it and hang it somewhere in our office.
So I bought this piece of equipment, started trying to figure out testing, right? Got the business partners at the time, and I got the company started. And long story short, from that standpoint on, about 3 months into not really testing patients and just trying to figure stuff out inside internal medicine, had a conversation with a colleague who is in this space, in the ENT space, actually a practicing ENT, and was telling him a little bit about what I was doing. And he actually said, as a practicing otolaryngologist, like, I have a completely, different issue, right? I have my audiology team that works for him, right? They see dizzy. They don't love it at all, which is very common. It's time consuming. The equipment's expensive, etc. They wanted to, he was curious essentially how to outsource something like this, right? Without making it seem like he didn't want to treat the patients, right? Not sending them straight to physical therapy, etc. So he was curious about that. So I inquired a little bit further, and he mentioned that I needed to meet an audiologist who was very well known here in this area. It's not Rob. That was very well known in the area. It turned out to be Rob's mentor, and had a conversation with her a little bit about what we were trying to do, and then how we kind of got connected. And she said, well, if you're looking in the dizzy space, right, then I have the person that you need to meet. And then at that point, she introduced me to Rob. He was working for her at the time, and I'll let him tell that kind of portion of it. But he was working for her at the time, and her company. And Rob and I connected over the phone. I told him a little bit about what we're doing. And fast forward 7 years later, it took us a little while to kind of get the things up and running to the best of our ability. 7 years later, but at the end of middle of November, we will surpass 16,000 patients that we've seen
Wow.
through various practices throughout the mainly right now up and down the East Coast. So, Rob, I'll let you intro yourself here, sir.
Sure. Brent did the heavy lifting there. So yeah, I audiologist obviously by training. I did my fourth year and specialized in dizziness and balance. And then I came back home here to Atlanta and I was working with our mutual colleague. I'd known her through school. She taught her class. I did a rotation with her when I was in school. And came back to Atlanta to start, my practice with her. And we were together for a while, and we're doing general audiology, hearing aids, and pediatrics. And I was trying to really kick the dizzy up there with it too. But that was my passion project, right? No one else was really trying to get that too much off the ground. No one was getting in the way, but it also wasn't a huge point of interest for the other providers in our group because right, it's for a lot of audiologists, they don't want to do it. It's expensive, all that sort of thing. So anyways, we're getting that set up, and then Giovanna, our colleague, introduced Brent and I and said, hey, he's looking at kind of a mobile dizzy service, and so Brent and I started chatting about it. I said, well, if we're going to do it, this is what you need to do, right? These are the tests that you need to do, that sort of thing. So we kind of kicked it off from there, very much in nights and weekends, right? Brent was our first technician, still our worst. In his defense, he was trying to run a business, but so he would test some. I get the stuff. I'd sit down, after I get home from work, sit down, go through the results at night. We had a Word document. I think we were sharing back and forth, right? Like an actual
Google. We had a Google.
Was it Google or was it
Google
Microsoft
Sheets.
Word?
I don't know. It may have been Word. I don't remember.
Yeah.
It was a Word document that Rob would like free type the answer, like I don't want to say answers, but the the findings in the appropriate spaces. But I literally had no idea how to really format it correctly where it was canned. So what he would type and all the margins would fall off and all the actual graphs and bars that were around the text would get off, and I would have to sit there and like drag and drop lines and insert images. It was very time consuming. So he would interpret it after hours, and then I would have to go in after he got done with that, fix the margins, make it look presentable, then save it and download as a PDF, and then drag it over into like a shared file access.
Yep.
that our customers had access to. So that was literally the first iteration of it.
Okay.
And I take a lot of offense to the fact that I am still being called the worst technician ever.
Well, I'm just, the truth is the truth, but it's all right. You've got other talents. We didn't need to keep you in the field. So
this is true.
That is actually one thing with our business. We, as best as can be done, we like for everyone in our organization to have at least a little bit of experience with our mobile teching, right? Going out, knowing what the testing is, actually going into these offices and doing the testing, that the entire process, because for us, it's incredibly important to just know the business from every aspect, right? Even if you're in scheduling, you got to know what's going to happen when that patient walks in the door. So we really, we really think it's important that everybody in our organization, at least in some capacity, does have that experience so that they know what we're doing, and I think it helps. I think it helps a lot because people better understand the challenges that come with it, right? With the role, because we'll be the first to tell you, we know it's not an easy role, right? It's repetitive. You're also moving around every day. But it helps us, I think, just as an organization be better, right? So
yeah, I think so just to kind of, understand exactly what the service is, can you help me to kind of paint a picture of how at least it started and then maybe what it's matured into today, but just kind of walk me through what some of those first customers of yours were like, and then obviously you had this mobile service. So can you kind of a day in the life, Brent, when you were a technician, like what does this actually look like?
Oh man, at the time at that point I mean, I guess we had two pieces of equipment because we weren't running an ENG off of the VAT software. So we had a VAT, which is a what?
Uh,
Auto rotation. What was the V in
Vestibular
vestibular?
auto rotation test. That, yeah.
I think it's for vestibular, but vestibular auto rotation test, which was a nightmare to perform. It had one laptop and it was able to perform this one test. Um, it would take forever to get readings because you were placing electrodes below and above the eye, a couple on the forehead, including the ground, and one on each side of the eye. And was trying to really look at, I guess, sinusoidal act. I mean, it was an
Look at the
active
VOR. Yeah.
rotation.
Yeah, it's
So
a VOR.
you're looking at the VOR, and I could never get readings, so that took forever. And then I would eventually we brought in a VNG, which is still what we use today, just much more advanced versions of it. Had to crank up. So I had two separate laptops. And one of our first customers we did some internal medicine primary care before we realized very quickly that's not where we needed to be. We worked with Dr. Bashik. He was one of the very first customers, was a neurologist of all people.
Yeah.
But let me put it this way. The service was accepted immediately. Once people could filter out if we were completely full of crap, honestly, or that we knew what we were doing and we were doing what most small businesses, really every business should do: provide good service, answer phone calls, provide good support, be honest, forthright, be upfront with pricing, set expectations. Once people really realize that's what we're doing, it spread like wildfire. I mean, we got a couple of, we'll say smaller, but single location practice ENTs on board. And then even started working with, a couple of practices that had 3 and 4 locations. So the concept of the mobile platform, which is how we got started, is simple in essence, right? We have equipment that comes with us and leaves at the end of the day. So we wheel in diagnostic equipment. We have everything that's needed to perform a full vestibular evaluation. From our standpoint, we do. I'll let Rob speak to the testing in a few, but we take all the equipment in, we do the testing, and we leave at the end of the day, right? So we're not taking over an entire exam room for 30 days because not a lot of people, most otolaryngologists out here, don't have enough dizzy patients to really warrant giving a complete room to. And in truth be told, there's not a ton of money in the reimbursement from it. Not when you compare it with the time spent testing, and honestly, the other items, or I guess things that otolaryngologists manage, right? They're not the funnest patients, as Rob had mentioned, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're not the easiest to deal with, and so they want those off the plate of their audiologist books. So it's funny, after a couple of months, we really, begin to view ourselves as a staff reallocation resource company, right? We're just taking this off the audiologist. By no means did we want to come in and portray that we were taking over audiology. We do nothing with hearing. We want to be an asset to the company, and come in and help, kind of take the service off you. We want to make sure these patients are being seen. And what was really cool about getting started, and it still happens with most of our customers, is when we start a new mobile customer, they'll usually tell us, well, I see, I probably have 3 or 4 to send to you, right, per month. So we schedule 1 day a month to come in and do the testing. What happens with that, like clockwork, is we begin to get more days because they are starting to see how easy that they had more of these patients generally, and then the ease of use for the testing, that their numbers begin to climb, their volume does, because they begin to have faith in what the service is that we provide, and they have trust in the the data summaries that we're providing back to them so that they can make official diagnosis. So they begin to climb at that point in time. So we have everything from, customers that call us, right? Like, hey, I got a list of 3 patients, stop by here. And we call them and give them a day, like, hey, it looks like we've got an opening next Friday. That's the least common of our business. Most common is when we set you up as a customer, we define how many days you need us. One day, typically it's one day every other week. We're in and out of those offices. They bill for the services as a fee for service. And we just charge for our, the time and everything that we're there. And it's worked out like clockwork for us. I joke, and I don't mean to sound overly confident, right? Or like braggadocious, I guess. But I joke that if you could drop me in Tacoma, Washington, and gave me 2 weeks to go speak with a couple of otolaryngologists, I could have a Topple technician up and running, and in 30 days after I left there, because the service is so needed everywhere else.
So this is what I wanted to ask real quick, because that's fascinating. And when you had initially said at kind of the earlier part of the story, there was, more or less that, the thought I had is like, they don't have those amount of days yet, and it's probably going to grow. And when you're landing a new client and you're kind of pitching this whole thing, I mean, initially, are they perceiving this as it's like I need somebody to take this off my plate kind of thing? Are they looking at this as a potential profit center? I think it's really interesting how you phrase that you're a staffing, reallocation company, more or less. But I'd be curious of what initially captivates them. Because I have, us in the industry, I think, understand the benefits of servicing this population and all the crossover and stuff like that. But I'd be curious from you on the front lines of what are the initial sort of, I guess, expectations that a otolaryngologist might have as to why they think they need to be putting more resources, maybe not internal, a third party's resources toward this portion of their patients, even if it's only 3 a month right at the start.
The thing about our company is that we kind of joke, but we go in whenever we talk to a new ENT, we go in and we basically show them a problem they didn't know they had, and also answer the question of how do I solve it, right? They know that these patients are coming in. They know that they'll say, maybe it's an ear, maybe it's somewhere else, okay? And they'll try and get them somewhere else. But what happens is they do send a neuro. Well, neuro takes 8 months. So guess what happens? That patient comes back to their chair. Right? That patient's coming back to the ENT in the meantime, right? They'll send it to PT. PT may work with them, but they don't get them better. So they come back to the ENT, right? So it's almost like they're there, not almost like they are there. They're recurring patients, and they can be a little frustrating because symptoms can be so, non-specific, right? And short of a couple things like, doing a gross motor exam or doing a Dix Hallpike, some bedside testing, you really can't get a lot of information on these patients. You can do an MRI, but even if there is a central nervous system problem, well, it may not be a structural abnormality, right? So the functional aspect of what we do, looking at the function of all these systems that are involved in our equilibrium function, that's where when we come in, we are really helping them tremendously in a way they didn't even know that they had, where they had an issue, right? And even if it is that they have audiologists who do dizzy for them, well, unfortunately for a lot of these practices, even if you do have providers that like to do it, they may not have access to all the equipment because it is incredibly expensive, right? If you wanted to look at getting a full set, rotary chair, electrophys, VNG, it's like $120,000, $160,000. And if you flip that and look at the reimbursement for Medicare rates, it's going to take you a long time to get out from under that burden.
Right, exactly. And that's where I was going with this, is like, that isn't really that compelling. But to your point, like, I guess what is going through my mind is what's sort of the status quo, the incumbent that you're competing against. I mean, clearly these people exist, and not only do they exist, but you're only capturing a really small portion of them because, it's as evidenced by the fact that when you do get in there, it just grows because clearly word's getting around in that like local market that there's a new option, a new way and an avenue to treat this. So I'd be curious of like, that's what I'm ultimately trying to kind of get at is like, what is it that's
Yeah.
so motivating about this for them? Because there's clearly something that they're looking at and they're saying, this is objectively a good business move on my part. And it's not probably, if they were to do it upon themselves, like do it themselves, like it's a different calculus because you got to, there's larger fixed costs and stuff like that.
So
Absolutely.
for us, honestly, Dizzy's not a profit center really for anybody. Let's be quite honest. The reimbursement's low, the equipment costs are high, so on and so forth. But that's not an issue for our customers. They're never, we aren't there to make people lose money using us, right? By any stretch of the imagination. But it's not like they're going to make a killing. Okay. Where the benefit is and where we see, what's I guess for myself and for Brent, that's so what's really impactful for us, where we really say, gosh, we're doing something pretty cool here, is that these providers come to us and say, look, if I break even on this throughout the entire year, if I break even, you guys are golden in my book because you have helped my patients and you've helped my office, right? You have taken these issues off my office, you've helped my patients, and you've helped me take better care of my patients. So I don't care if I make a dime this year because you've done this for me to get it off my plate, right? And that's for us, it's huge.
What we also know too is that that we have working for us is Rob's comment earlier, the fact that most audiologists don't love to do it. It's very time consuming. They typically don't run not them themselves, but the efficiency is usually not as efficient as we can be because of just the sheer volume of what we do. I mean, we have employees that run 120 of these a month, right? As they travel around, they're doing 120 our panels a month. So we're taking it off the audiologist plate. And what is somewhat, a little bit harder to quantify, but we know the number is there, and some practices have done that, is the amount of hours that we're freeing up from the audiologist doing it to be able to do things like hearing evaluations and fittings and sales, right? So most hearing aid appointments, as I understand, right, are around 30 minutes. Well, if you're doing the testing that we're doing, it's an hour and 30 minutes, right? And then they would have to probably spend 30 minutes or so doing an interpretation. That's 4 hearing aid slots that they could have filled. So now you
Totally.
quantify that. And if you look at, the amount of, revenue generated from the hearing aid sale versus the amount of revenue that is generated from vestibular testing, you're looking at about a 10x, 8 to 10x of what you would be generating. And so it's a no-brainer. But like Rob said, they're usually not aware of they are, right? We get phone calls from, hey, our girls love it, not today. And then what happens is that equipment breaks in 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, and they're like, the equipment out, and you're up.
Right.
I mean, literally, you're up. We're not buying, new. And we've even, relegated to, we can talk about our centers here in a few moments, but, one thing that's really cool about us, we're now putting in full service centers where we actually build, manage, maintain an entire center full time in a otolaryngology office. But even then, we will skip out, if you will, for a day because the audiologists that are part of that practice really want to, keep their skills up. And so whether it's for themselves or students that are coming through, so we allow them to use the equipment for, a couple of days per month to, remain fresh on their testing. So now all parties are satisfied with it, right? So it's been a really cool kind of eye-opening experience for here. Every year, again, not trying to sound like we're bragging over here, but we just surpassed last month how many total tests we did last year. And every year it's just consistent growth over growth of
That's
the amount of
awesome.
we see. It's just stretching out between, getting to everyone. So what's really important for Rob and myself is we don't want it to be viewed as if we can only get to certain areas. And unfortunately, we are somewhat handicapped by that, right? We want everyone who is treating dizziness and all the patients that have issues with these imbalance and dizzy problems to have access to be able to have the appropriate testing. So we're working on a solution that we mentioned a little bit to you, but we'll keep to ourselves for this call's purpose. Maybe this is on call number 2, follow-up call.
Sure.
Because I can see it right now. You're going to have 275,000 viewers and listeners to
Oh
this.
yeah.
We're just going to
Millions.
I'm gonna plug our phone. I'm gonna ask that you have a banner that just runs our phone number across, and we'll just field all the calls here. But for our second, third conversation, I mean, we'll be able to talk a little more about that though. But we're excited about it, and this solution will hopefully be able to reach the masses.
I find it really interesting though, like thank you for kind of helping me to understand all this, because you're right. Like I feel like one of the challenges that I've heard a lot are all of those sort of common objections that Rob laid out. It's the equipment's expensive, it takes a long time. The reimbursement is questionable, I guess, at best. And so where I've thought, and I think your business model is really, really smart because you sort of alleviate all of those in one fell swoop. You don't have to incur the like large, costs associated with buying the equipment. You don't have to necessarily worry about this being a profit center for you. But I guess I'd be, just to kind of piggyback one more question on this is like, are you seeing secondary, like a second order effect of by servicing this portion of the patient population for any given one of your customers, and then that starts to take off, that grows? Are there other ways that benefits the broader business, such as those people sometimes end up becoming hearing aid patients too? I mean, are you seeing things like that where you can start to point to when you really have a really healthy vestibular offering within a practice? What are the benefits of that when it's like kind of fully mature?
So a couple, and you do raise a couple of correct ideas with it, right? So you have a dizzy patient, and a dizzy patient goes to see a provider, and we work with that provider, right? So let's say that, well, that person gets really good care, they get more accurate care and a more accurate diagnosis ultimately from their physician, and then they get better, right? They get better. So what happens when that person then has hearing loss, or they've got sinus issues or allergies, or, God forbid, head and neck cancer? Well, they're going to go back to that provider because that provider took care of them. They're going to refer their friends and family members, not necessarily strictly for dizziness, but it's that kind of knock-on effect of, hey, this person took care of this issue for me, and I know they do these other things, so I go see them. They're going to take good care of me.
Right.
I don't say that the two are born. It's just that because they have the diagnostics, we're making a much more educated diagnosis, right?
Well,
For
talk
sure.
about some of the statistics, right? Not just for dizzy. I mean, the average dizzy patient sees 5
The
providers.
life cycle, the life cycle of a dizzy patient is the average dizzy patient. It takes 3 to 5 years to get a diagnosis, regardless of if it is the correct diagnosis.
Wow.
They see on average between 4 and 6 specialists during that time frame, right? So I know here in Atlanta, it's like 10 months before you can get in to see neuro, right? So we see a lot of times, hey, I went to the ER, I went to urgent care, I went to my primary care. Well, what next? Well, they thought it was this, so they sent me to ENT. Okay, well, ENT took a month and a half to get in. All right. Then we did this, and then we tried that and it didn't work. And we did that and this, that, and the other. Well, then they said, I don't think it's an ear. I'm going to send you to neuro. Okay. Well, that's basically a whole nother year. This person,
Totally.
you know what I mean? So statistically, it's through the roof, right? There's something the other day we were doing a presentation I was putting together, and statistically, for someone with benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, right? The average cost for that person to get diagnosed and treated is $2,600 because they're going to the ER, right? You go to the ER, you're not leaving until you get a CT and an EKG. It's like you're going away present, right? Then they're going to refer you to somebody else, so on and so forth. So, I mean, the average $2,600 for something that you can go online and fix yourself with, right? You watch a video online, or better yet, you come see a provider. But Really and truly, it's absurd, but it's because people, if they can't see it, right? If you can't take a picture of it and you can't see it with your eye, people don't know what to do with it without doing the function.
Totally.
And the function exams, unfortunately, are difficult to come by, right? Because not a lot of people do them. So the other aspect that we run into a good bit as well is that people will go to physical therapy first, and PT will see them and they'll do their gross motor exam, right? They'll do a little finger saccade, follow the finger kind of thing, maybe walk down walk down the hallway, come back. Okay. Hey, I don't see anything wrong with you. You're probably okay, right? Maybe it's your blood pressure. Well, no, it's not, right? Maybe it was, you blew out your left ear or something like that. So these are just some of the things that we see because there's not great access to the actual diagnostics that can figure out what's wrong with you, right?
Yeah.
That's the
And
issue.
one of the things I think we feel, because you talked about that, and I know you're talking about within that, potential otolaryngology practice, but is really being able to, fuel the speeding up, if you will, the process of the correct therapy, right? I joke a little bit about, you wouldn't go to an orthopedist, right, for a torn up knee, have him look at it, physically look at it and say, okay, let's get you to rehab, right? You would say, whoa, is it my ACL, my MCL, my PCL? Like, what's going on here? And sometimes that can happen, right? They can go directly from ER to an urgent care, or an urgent care directly to PT. No one's fault. We're not blaming. It's just the nature of what's happened in the system. And a lot of times, as Rob says, it's just access or knowing where to go. And so, being able to really fuel helping the patient get better faster with an appropriate diagnosis has been extremely beneficial here in Atlanta, and we will be expanding upon this. Rob is a certified actual APTA now. It was the Georgia Physical Therapy Association. Is certified at teaching vestibular rehabilitation, and we've certified roughly 50 or 60 physical therapists in Greater Atlanta, and how to the kind of the latest and greatest, if you will, anatomy, physiology, and then the diagnostic piece of what all goes into vestibular rehabilitation. And for me, what I've sat in on these sessions, and what was really cool, the biggest feedback we got from the physical therapists was around the diagnostic testing. Like, they had no clue that this electrophys equipment looked at this, and being able to be shown, seen, taught about all the equipment utilized and how that leads to the diagnosis, which then leads to the recommendations for therapy, just how game-changing that was. And I tell you what's been really cool is a very large physical therapy practice. I don't know if you want me to, or physical therapy organization. I don't know if you want me to plug names here on the podcast, but
Go for it.
we've been working with Physical, which is a very large physical therapy organization. Actually, they just opened their 600th location, but they specialize in dizziness and imbalance. So we've been able to kind of collaborate a little bit further with those guys about potential solutions that will help in this world. But one of their business models that they've had for some time, and it's still very prevalent out there, is that otolaryngology practices actually own some physicals, right? They own them because they see a plethora of dizzy. So now when we come in even further and we're able to sit down, Rob himself and our other team of audiologists are able to sit down and have conversations with the physical therapists at their their physical owned location, is just, it's a game changer from a continuum of care being closed, in our opinion, right? The doctor saw him, said he did his evaluation. I think it's this. They got him over to audiology. We then got him in for diagnostic testing for vestibular, who then got him directly to their PT to go through the proper rehab protocols. And all in all, these patients get better, right? And so kind of closing that continuum of care has been important.
I was going to ask you, Rob, like, as an audiologist that is heavily specialized in this area, as Brent just mentioned, one of the biggest challenges it seems is that the rest of the medical community doesn't seem to have any awareness that of the role that the audiologist can play here. And how do we combat that? I mean, clearly you guys are combating this through your own efforts at Topple, but I'm asking a broader question here, which is, I guess, why do we think that is that audiology is so absent, I guess, of this whole sort of medical equation when they really should be playing such a vital role here, particularly around the diagnostics?
Well, it starts with our educational models, right? That's where it starts. I know with my education, we had two classes on the history of amplification, right? I don't know about you. I really don't care what happened in 1940 with the hearing aid. Wikipedia article when it's 10 p.m. and I can't fall asleep, right? I mean, truly, okay. I had like I had like an intro to balance, right? And then we had, a little bit of do some clinical classes here. I had a balance slot when I was in school, but I never saw a single patient, you know. I mean, I'm serious, right? There are so many other modalities with which audiology could flourish, but we have unfortunately just professionally become beholden to a hearing aid. And that's not to say hearing aids are bad or, people, providers that are selling hearing aids are doing anything wrong, because they're not. It's a vital part of the equation, right?
Right.
Vital thing for people. It's just that I think that we've done a disservice to ourselves of becoming.
You've been pigeonholed.
Yeah, I mean, we have, right? Like, for example, intraoperative neurophysiologic monitoring, right? That is looking at, we're looking at nerve function, muscle function during very specific spinal surgical cases, neurosurgical cases, and things like that. That's well within the scope of practice for an AUD, right? You're looking at auditory processing disorder. You're looking at vestibular. There are a whole host of other things that we're just not taught about in school. Someone may mention it in passing, but we don't really do anything with it. And that, again, I know I'm painting with a bit of a broad brush because I'm speaking only from my experience.
Sure.
Right? Your mileage may vary depending on your institution and what resources you have available. But broadly, professionally, we don't go after these things, right? We don't do that. And we've got to do that because it is, I mean, in my opinion, we are at that either thrive or die point with our profession, right? Where are we going? There's managed care. Managed care is coming down. That's changing the way that we think about a lot of things. Not to say it's going to completely change how people sell hearing aids, but it's going to impact it, right? So we are at that crossroads of how do we go about fixing our kind of professional model, becoming that true doctor level, professional level individual, or B, does it kind of fade into obscurity, right? Because you've got a hearing aid dispenser that can fit a hearing aid just as well as an audiologist can. I know that's going to be a controversial statement.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. Tools are available for people to do the same thing. If you're doing real ear, right, a hearing instrument specialist can do real ear just like I can sit down and fit a hearing aid. I mean, to be quite frank, I'd trust a hearing instrument specialist over myself fitting a hearing aid any day of the week right now because I haven't touched one in years.
Right.
But that's the concern. That's the concern that we have professionally. They're also not under our general purview. Why have we let hearing instrument specialists kind of branch off on their own that don't have oversight by audiology, right? Why have we done this? I just think it's kind of something that we've let slip out of our grasp a little bit. Not to say we can't fix it, and it's not anybody's fault by any stretch of the imagination, but professionally, we've got to kind of, we need to circle the wagons a little bit and understand what we want to do and where we want to go, right? ADA does have they did a great presentation this year regarding where they see audiology in 2050, and I love the idea, but how are we going to get there? We've got to push it. The younger population in audiology, it's not growing, right? We actually had a phone call yesterday. We were talking
70%.
I think so. Yeah. Something like 70% of audiologists are at or near retirement age.
Yeah.
It's insane. You know what I mean?
Well, so some real talk here though, with the shrinking workforce and a growing demand. I mean, I think that like that this is the thing I always struggle with is that it's like one of the most asymmetric looking supply and demand equations. I feel like that's truly out there. You know, if you're really factoring in the amount of hearing loss and, you know, all of the tinnitus and, you know, all the different things like the balance disorders, whatever you like, there is so much demand for this type of professional, but clearly things aren't the equation's not squaring in such a way that's driving people to want to become an audiologist. And so, like in this model that you have, I'd be curious to understand, you know, like you said, you're not coming into these clinics to compete with the audiologist. What does that relationship look like here? Because a lot of what's being done is actually being facilitated by a technician, but clearly you need audiological oversight. And that's, I guess, kind of part of this like whole broader conversation, which is, are we, is the audiologist like basically, you know, almost operating from a place of territorialness of like, I need to do this to where they're literally running all the diagnostics and doing all the technician work and all of this stuff. When in reality that they need to really ladder up into a more higher up on the food chain so that they are doing more of that oversight. And I'd be curious to hear from you guys of like I said, you kind of have circumvented some of those major objections that, you know, an ENT or somebody would have about why they don't want to equip their audiology, you know, department within their setting with all of these different things. And so they're going to contract with somebody like you. What does that relationship then look like with a company like yours and some of those like sitting audiologists?
So it can go a few different ways. I like to think that overall we've got a very good relationship, and the reason is we want to work with everybody that's involved in the practice. We are not here to supplant anyone or push anyone out of a job, right? That's not us by any stretch of the imagination. What we're here to do is help as a resource to, you know, it's a force multiplier in essence, right? We've got practices that they'll do one V&G a day, 5 days a week. Okay. We can do their same weekly schedule in a day. Right. You know,
For
so
sure.
you know, that's where we kind of come in and change the game. And it's not that our technicians they're obviously they're not, you know, they're not going over the data, they're not treating anything, but it's you know, I understand people kind of getting defensive about a group like us potentially coming in and taking away you know, services or anything like that. But that's not what we're here for, right?
And I
We're
think,
here.
well, I think we do a good job too of trying to involve them in the process a lot. We've had
Well, that's kind of where I was going with this, you
a
know,
number
is
of
there
audiologists come down here
engagement
to
because
Atlanta.
it's you've basically enabled this part of their service in
Yeah.
some ways. And so I'd be curious of what that collaboration looks like because I would imagine that again, you know, just taking some of the things we talked about some of those second order effects and some of the force multipliers and stuff like that. I mean, in so many different ways, you really are helping to you know, improve and pronounce the services of the audiology department within the ENT. And I'd be if you can get past that sense of somebody's kind of coming for my job, because that is sort of the mindset that seems to, you know, that's pervasive in this industry of that's how it's always been is that there's this kind of like a zero sum mentality of you know you're only going to be able to get your piece kind of thing. And I think that the point is like what I'm hearing over and over is like there's so many patients to go around that as you mentioned you get in there and it's like the appointments just start to kind of go through the roof because the market recognizes that you're an option for them. And that would seem to benefit the audiologists that are in those settings too, because of all of the like sort of second order tangible benefits that go
Oh,
along with having that offering.
One of
we
the big things we do is you know, we train here. So we've got classes that I've put together that we teach on, you know, how to do the testing, how to interpret the testing, rehab recommendations, some other things. We have software. So we've got a software that's going to be released shortly. That's to help with the interpretation of these results, right? If we go into a practice and we've got a tech there that does the testing and someone at the practice wants to read, by all means, you know, be quite frank, it takes a little bit of work off my plate, you know.
we're going to have a solution for anything that's
Yeah.
dizzy related. So you know that's the goal for us. I think we do a really good job of trying to include the audiology in the process, as I was saying. You know, whether it's the decision making process or it's just understanding who we are. As you know, we both mentioned we do bring We do bring audiologists down here. A lot of times the director of audiology may want to come down and check us out, see what we're doing, get to know Rob and his team. And, in those situations, they go back with nothing but positive reviews because they then see, okay, these guys are not just out for my job, right? Because of how quickly we can get to these patients, it's funny because they're time blocked, especially in the ENT practice, right? They're time blocked. And so they do 2 appointments a week or something like that. It's not uncommon for us to say, okay, they say we're ready to go. We get through that whole process and we're starting in 30 days. We get started and they say, well, perfect. Now that you guys are getting ready, here's our list. We have 62 people that we decided not to test. So start calling. And that's literally how it goes sometimes. We're trying to clear up lists because of them time blocking the way they do, because they need to spend more time to different tasks as an audiologist. They tend up being booked out for 4 to 6 months sometimes. And obviously we alleviate that list for them. But I think being able to include them, being able to include students, we get calls from our customers, from the audiology department at our customers' offices, asking if students can sit in on some of the testing at some points in time, just to stay watched and stay refreshed on vestibular and understand it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's just a really cool business model. And like I was telling you guys before we started recording, it just gives me a lot of optimism because I do think that the other side of this is like the market largely being, sort of overseen by audiology is servicing more potential patients. And we all know that like this is such a word of mouth oriented, industry and service that it just seems to like really stand to benefit any given practice that has these things that are adjacent to one another. As soon as somebody's going to be treated like you said, Rob, and they have a really good experience, they're going to then assume, okay, that's who I'm going to go to for this next time around for whatever other condition that I or someone around me has. So to kind of close out, I always find it really interesting and I love to hear about kind of like those early days as a company when you were getting started out. When did this feel like we actually have something here? This is really cool. This is really exciting. And what were like those kind of early milestones for you where you get your first customer and then, maybe you define like a service for the first time and you're like, wow, like this all works. Can you help me to just kind of walk me through some of the memory lane in terms of what, now it's like it seems a little bit petty, but back in the day, that was a huge milestone for you. And I love to hear these kinds of things.
It's kind of a combination, but I'll tell you that there's a rep that we've worked with for a long time, and for the first every time we get a new system to take out in the field, right, or get calibrations on or whatever, he'd always come in and he'd say, no one's ever been able to do this for very long. You guys that have been at this for more than a year, it's more than 2 years and more than 3. A lot of people have tried this, and I always got a kick out of that, just hearing the same. It's like no one was able to really do this
Yeah.
very well, guys.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Nice guy, but it was just from his experience, he's seen stuff like this kind of pop up in the past, and that's always funny. I'd say the big time kind of. I think the big thing for me, and Brent, you may disagree, but when we got our first big group outside of the state of Georgia, that to me was really like, okay, we've really got something that we can run with now, right? So we have Georgia, we can do Georgia because we're here, but we've got this opportunity. We're gonna, we can figure this out. Like we can actually scale this thing, pretty quickly.
And you're just kind of building the business at that same time.
Yeah.
Like whatever the customer needs, we'll do it. And you go running back to one another. We need this.
Yeah.
I would say being able to pay ourselves was a pretty big milestone, right?
Yeah.
That's a relatively decent one, right?
Yeah, that you guys are smaller business, so those are good. I mean, Rob mentioned some good ones. We were told out of the get-go that no one can do. Like many have tried and failed, right?
Didn't have a snowball's chance in hell.
Yeah, essentially, like you're gonna fail. They were saying that.
For me and Brent, I think when someone says that, we're both like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah,
Challenge
I don't think
accepted.
very likely when you doubt me, it doesn't do
Yeah.
well. It doesn't do well for the person doubting me. Let's just put it that way. So that just fuels my fire even further. Um, that's a good that's a good milestone. I mean, when we got to 1,000 patients, I mean, I think we had like a little party-ish, right? Like just to like, how did we get here? This is crazy. And it's funny as we're talking now, like our very first our very first year, we did 1,100 patients, like our first
That's pretty good for your
full
first year.
fiscal year, not so our first full, so January to December, we did 1,100 patients. And this year we're going to surpass 4,000 patients. So
Yeah.
it's the milestones just kind of keep coming and growing, but there's I mean, we've had some crazy stories that we can't. Well, again, version two, right? We got to keep some of these things PG that we've had to
You're
do.
really teasing the next time that you come on here.
Yeah, no, I'm like setting myself up. That's because when we get off the call, I want to tell you some of these stories, and you're like, you can't tell that one on there, right? The benefits of being a small business owner,
Yeah.
but uh, it's been interesting. Every day it's growing. We're trying to, be innovative ourselves, just like anybody else. We're trying to be as innovative as possible. We're trying to field calls of where we go next. Just worked out. I mean, I literally got a phone call earlier that said, how do you, very, very large organization, and said, okay, we're ready to get you to Dallas. Like, how do we get there now? And here's who all wants to come on board with it. And so we're like, yes. And then there's also yeah,
Right.
how do we get to Texas?
Well, and how do we grow into those opportunities? And I mean, I just, this all resonates a lot. Like you said, small business, guys, one to another. It's just like so much of it. You look back and you have these like fleshed out offerings and stuff, but like there was a time when that was on the back of a napkin and, it kind of presents itself and you have to just like in the moment as the plane is flying, you have to like figure out how you're going to then service that customer. But the at the end of the day, it's all about like just prioritizing the customer's needs, and then that's kind of like how the business gets built. And
Well,
it's fascinating how it happens.
I truly believe that. I tell all the time. So right, we don't have a contract, right? But the way that we're set up, you have to have a service agreement that you agree to provide services, but we don't have a contract, and that was extremely important to me. Right, I don't like being locked in to anything, which is probably why I'm still operating with the iPhone 11 here, is because I don't want to be locked into having a contract for using you, etc. So it was very important to me. I used to describe us as, I want to be the Amazon of vestibular testing. I want you to want to work with us because
Mhm.
we provide really good service and a great support, and we are, it's important what we do, and actually what service we do provide, who we're helping treat. I want you to work with us because of that, not because you're tied to a contract. And we've had very few people walk away from our services. It's usually because they brought in another audiologist who absolutely loved vestibular, and like part of the deal was he or she wanted to take it back over themselves.
Mhm.
That's usually where it goes. Or they got sold to a hospital and hospital said, no way, you got to send it over to our diagnostic center. That's usually what happened.
Sure. That would
So
it makes sense.
I think our biggest challenge, coming up is going to be the fact that mobile is mobile, but like we discussed earlier, we can only take mobile in so many locations. I can't put a tech down in Valdosta, Georgia for 1 day a month for one year,
Right.
unfortunately, right? It doesn't make economical sense. We can't support that, but we're really working on the back end for other solutions for those situations. We can't just rest on mobile being in the big cities. We've got to find other opportunities to be able to reach these more rural providers, or these smaller groups or smaller areas. So that's going to be kind of our next challenge, I think.
Yeah, that will be really interesting to see. I mean, because again, it goes back to just the latent demand in this market, I think, for these kinds of things. And so it's really, I think, at this point, figuring out how do you tap the demand in a way that's viable. And I think that's what's really cool about kind of like operating in 2024 is you have so many of these new, like internet-based tools and stuff like that, that, you can kind of hodgepodge things together in a way where, you can start to make use of different, combinations of things that can cater to those populations in ways that previously weren't available. So I have I have all the faith that you guys will continue to innovate and find ways to just keep growing. But I find this whole thing to be so interesting, but also emblematic of, I think, where the industry is kind of going as a whole, which is how do you, again, as a really small workforce, cater to all of this demand? And it seems like that it's begging this question of like, how can the limited amount of audiologists that are available continue to um, almost, kind of like prioritize some of the, I'll call it grunt work, when if it was elevated writ large, you could, I guess by, you could essentially see more people and you could impact more people by being at that higher level. And so I feel like these are the kinds of ways that actually all materializes, is you start to have these services that cater to, like I said, some of those like common objections as to why we don't have a balance center in every hearing center, more or less.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. It's
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end. We will have to do a round two here in the future.
Yes.
So until then, everybody take care. We will chat with you next time. Cheers.